it was this whole idea that if I was being told that I'd done something wrong, or if I was being shown where I needed to improve on something, I would immediately, like, the defenses would come up. And it would literally stop me in my tracks from trying to accomplish anything, just in case I got it wrong. Sometimes I wouldn't even speak in case I said the words wrong, or my accent didn't sound right and somebody couldn't understand me. I was always in this state of fear. So when I started teaching outdoor sports, I was always trying to be perfect. I was always trying to get it exactly right. You know, you want to keep people safe. You want to keep things running smoothly. However, as most people know, right, there is no such thing as perfection, especially when you're working outdoors in nature, especially when you're working with people. And of course, I would get things wrong. Of course, I would make mistakes. So I would end up feeling like a complete failure. I'd get upset, I'd get angry, I'd beat myself up over it. All trying to be behind the scenes, of course. But I remember one day my mentor at the time said to me, there's no such thing as failure, there is only feedback. And feedback is simply information. And whatever you do with that information is up to you. But know this, feedback is a gift. And whether you accept it or not, again, is up to you. And it's a gift because it tells you what's working and what isn't working, so that you know what the next step is to improve. Literally blew my mind. I had never thought about it in that way before. I'd never thought about how we can take information, we can have a failure, and we can just take that feedback as being information, rather than having to have an emotional response to it and be upset because you didn't get it right. Liberating, I have to say. It simply became about how I started to recognize that the problem with the failure was that it started to become an identity rather than just being something that I did. So I would start to say things like, well, I'm just a failure. I never get things right. I always get things wrong. And I remember reading Carol Dweck's book on mindset, and she talks about how when we phrase, or when it's I failed, soon becomes I'm a failure, part of our identity. It's creating this fixed mindset, and that's when we then can't believe that we can change, and it becomes that whole, well, this is just the way I am. That's just how it's always been, because we have all of this past evidence backing up that statement. But one of the things that Carol points out in her book is that it's not your identity. Your failure is not who you are as a person, because you are not your behaviour. It's just simply an action that you took that didn't work out for whatever reason. And so whilst failure can be that painful experience, it certainly doesn't have to define who you are, right? I always feel it for those footballers when you see them coming out on the pitch, especially when it's like a big tournament like the World Cup, and they're all coming out and they're all feeling super patriotic for their country, and they want to be the best. They want to be the best in the team. They want to give their best to the fans, and then halfway through the game they score an own goal. Absolute devastation. You can just see how gutted they are. It's just like the world's just being, swept away from them. And then 5 minutes later, they're back scoring goals as if nothing's happened. I've always admired that mindset, and I always think that we can learn a lot from sport and sport psychology about moving past failures instead of letting the experience define you, instead of letting the experience become part of who you are. So for this video, the reason why I'm here is because I want to share with you some simple questions that you can ask yourself when you're faced with that moment of failure, with that prospect of failure, which we're going to reframe from now on as feedback, right? Because there's no such thing as failure, there's only feedback. Specifically, we're going to explore one of the problem-solving frames that we find in neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. And think of the frame, the reframe. It's where we choose to take on a different perspective, a different mindset when we are taking on a challenge. So instead of focusing on it being a failure, we need to focus on it as being feedback. But first, we have to have our ideal goal in mind. Like, have clarity on your goal. What is it that you are actually trying to achieve? What's the end outcome? What's the end situation? So thinking about what it is that you truly want, that is the starting point. Okay, we need to know where you're at for that, and I'll be putting some videos specifically out for goal setting. So if you haven't done anything for specific goal setting, let me know in the comments, because I'll be putting one out soon and I'll give you a shout when we do that, when I've done that. Because once you have your goal in mind, any feedback, any information that you get is going to help you know whether you are on track or off track. Okay, simply, again, information. That's how we respond to the feedback. And how you respond to feedback is absolutely up to you, right? Feedback's a gift. You can accept it or not accept it. So in NLP, there's a powerful belief, a presupposition, where we say there is no such thing as failure, there is only feedback. And embracing this simple mindset is where we can look at failures as no longer being roadblocks, simply stepping stones. And each time that things don't go as you might have planned, each time we get information back, we gather insights, and we make adjustments for next time, right? So we have to think about, how do we approach our failures in a meaningful way? Like the footballers, how do they approach it in a meaningful way? So we have to equip ourselves with some reflective questions. And the more you do this stuff, the more easier it becomes in the moment. So we have to simply first ask, question 1 is, where am I in the process? So where are you in your journey towards your goal? Okay. Again, having that clear outcome, that clear outcome in mind, that clear goal of where you are going is important here. So simply ask, where are you in the process? Start, middle, end, which point of it are you at? Because whatever information, whatever failures you've made so far, that feedback is going to determine your next step. Make sense? So then we want to ask, your second question is then, where am I in the process so far? Question 1. You have to bear with me. What have I achieved so far? So what have you achieved so far? So thinking about, what have you achieved? This is super important, because this is where we get to compare ourselves to ourselves. How far have I come? This is not about looking out to what other people are doing, or, well, I failed and they did it and they're doing a better job than me. Like, bollocks to that, because that kind of thinking will only keep you stuck. If you've got some feedback about something that you need to adjust, recognizing how far you've come, comparing yourself to yourself. So I've made it this far in my journey. This is how far I've come. Look at where I was. See how much I've grown. Just that simple exercise of looking back, seeing how far you have come, is a reminder, is a reinforcement, is motivation for you to recognize that this is just about taking another step, just like it was back here. All of these little steps that you have taken along the way to get you to this point, we just keep going. Little steps, okay? So comparing is really what we're doing, comparing ourselves to ourselves for that one. Okay, so next question. What have I learned from my experiences? So when we look back along that process of how far you have come, what are those things that you have learned? And it's important to recognize what we've learned from those experiences, because not only are we in a different position with ourselves, but we now have improved knowledge. We now have new skills and capabilities that perhaps we didn't have before. So again, recognizing the learning. That's the important bit with that question, is what is the learning? Recognize the learning, because essentially this is a learning journey. And the moment we forget that it's a journey about learning, it's kind of game over, because we become too attached to, why haven't I got it now? What's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? Sod that. We have to stay in this frame of mind of, there's no such thing as failure. Feedback. What am I doing with the information that I'm getting? And you will have had feedback along your journey so far. So what are those things specifically that you have learned? And it might be that you need to sit down for 10, 20 minutes, do a little bit of reflective time around this, especially if you're stuck in this, oh my God, I've failed again. I'm terrible. I'm no good. Start with these questions that I've shared with you is really going to pull you out of that mindset and put you into a new frame of thinking. So where am I in the process? Question 1. What have I achieved so far? Question 2. Question 3. What have I learned from my experiences? Okay, so a couple more questions to go, but they're all equally valuable questions that are going to help you switch different gears when it comes to thinking about failure. So your next question is, what do I need to do differently based on what I've discovered? So this is where we've got that information, we've got the feedback. Whether you are still looking at it as criticism or a failure, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where you're at with it right now. The idea is that we look at it and think, okay, I've got this information, just take a step back from it without the emotional attachment, okay? Some of you might find that easy to do. Some of you might find it really hard to do. This is why we have coaches, okay? This is why I do what I do, is helping people disassociate from things in life that we don't need to be attaching ourselves to, so we can have that observing perspective and ask, what do I need to do differently based on what I've discovered or what I've been told, what's being shared with me? When we are so focused on something, we can become blinkered to all other information. When we do get some information back that doesn't align with our outcome or that doesn't align with us and our identity, we can become dismissive and ignore it. However, that information could be absolutely valuable in order for you to reach your next step. So be open to the information. Again, what you do with it is your choice, but be open to the idea that somebody out there might know more than you, okay? Somebody might not present their feedback in a delightful tone, let's say. However, it's the information. It's not about how do you feel about what's being shared about you. It's what can you do with that information that they've given you? What can you do with the information that you've found out? Make sense? So next question is thinking about your goal in mind, thinking about that outcome that you have. This is where we need to become clear about what feedback will signal that I've reached my goal. Like, how do you know that you've reached your goal? This is where we can begin to really connect with, okay, so when somebody gives me a round of applause, when somebody tells me that well done, that pat on the back, when I've increased my salary, when I've got that new job, that's when I'll know I've reached my goal. What will you see? What will you hear? What will you feel? What will you smell? What will you taste? It's really about getting your senses involved here. I will be putting a video out on how we can set clear goals and get clarity on our goals and how we can get aligned with our goals. So go to that video if you haven't done your goals yet. And if you go there and I haven't put it out yet, it will be out soon because it's like the next one that I'm going to do. But what is the information that your senses are getting to tell you that you've reached your goals, okay? Which, if you've not done goal setting, might not make sense, but you know what your outcome is, right? You know what your goal is. You know where you want to be. What will that look like? What will it sound like? What will it feel like? What will it taste like? What will it smell like, okay? Connecting with that is going to remind you, it's going to allow you to absorb information. It's going to allow you to accept feedback, to take on board information because it has a purpose. The purpose is for you to reach your outcome, right? And to get to our outcome, to get from A to B, it's not a one-man job. You are not on your own with it. Get the information, use other people's perspectives to increase your own perspective, and it's going to allow you to move towards your goals, towards your outcomes, much, much faster than if you're just honed in and doing it all yourself. Make sense? So, okay, so that is how we use the problem solving frame from NLP, from neuro-linguistic programming, when it comes to failure. So remember, there is no such thing as failure, there is only feedback. And also remember that every step that you take, whether it feels like failure or not, all right, every step, every action is a valuable and significant part of your journey towards reaching your goals. So if you found this video helpful, okay, then please don't forget to like, to subscribe and share. Please share your feedback below. Share what's one lesson that you've learned with feedback in your own life. Remember my story about how I was so not open to feedback. I took everything as criticism. Everything was just like as if I was getting pounded in the face every time for getting it wrong. And now I'm really open to it. So share your insights, share your feedback.